Well, here we are, another episode of Soul Sessions with Creative Mind. What are we talking about today, Rob?
Good to be here. Yes, today we're talking about our continuing series on emotions. This one on anger. Probably one of the main emotions that nobody gets away with not working with. Even the Dalai Lama, right, when they asked him, do you get angry? Of course I do. I have to work with it.
And, you know, I remember when we first met, I was dealing with someone who was angry at me, and I didn't know shadow work yet, and we had just met. I was still doing my law of attraction stuff. And you said, oh, that's your anger. And I said, I'm not angry. And then when I worked through it, I realized like all this anger that I had been not aware of and that I've been suppressing, but it was like right on the peripheral. Like I kind of knew it was there, but I didn't. Yeah. I felt like the edges of it, but we don't want to be seen as angry, and we think angry is bad. So so this is going to be an interesting conversation. So either you're aware of being angry, or that maybe you're not aware, and maybe we'll make you aware of this powerful emotion.
Three things. We're going to talk about how do we get conditioned around anger in general, right? Kind of the things that a lot of us experience. What happens when we repress anger? What does that look like? What does it do to our innards? And then how to work with it, right? Just some ideas on what do I do to, if I identify some of these things that you guys are talking about as, I must be repressing anger, or it's time for me to deal with this anger. How do I go about that?
So when it comes to anger, how would you describe what anger is? How can someone identify something as anger? And I think that a lot of people think anger is just that obvious shouting, yelling, angry person. But anger also comes in, I call it anger light. So frustration, a little resentment, like that little like pebble in your shoe, either toward yourself or your past or for others. And it kind of digs into you, and you feel this tension in your body. But you don't think of it as anger. You think, I'm just frustrated. It's kind of like putting a nice bow on anger in a way. But not letting yourself fully feel that powerful emotion.
Yeah, so let's back up a little bit. Evolutionary wise, it's part of the tools, one of the great tools that we have to deal with difficult situations. Because if somebody really transgresses against us, just like in animal life, your response is an angry response to protect yourself, to defend the loved ones, to defend the group, etc. So it evolved, over millions of years, maybe even further, right? Because it goes back into animal life, as a protective mechanism, as a defense mechanism, as a way of understanding what are the boundaries that we want to set up with others as well, how to communicate those boundaries, and what do we do when people trespass those boundaries with us. So it's a very natural and useful part of our emotional life.
So we can't deny it. We won't survive without it.
That's right. Yeah, it is essentially a survival tool. Now, is it, of course, because it's natural, do we want to be expressing it all over the place? Of course not. We need to understand it. But what happens in when we get conditioned around these emotional, this expression of anger, we're told, no, don't do that. We're repeatedly told, no, do not show these, because they're considered negative, right? They're identified as these are bad, negative emotions. And so that starts the conditioning right there, that if we express this anger, we're judging ourselves to be bad because everyone has told us that's a negative emotion and it's a bad one, and you want to get it under control. But they don't tell us how.
Yeah.
They simply tell us repress it.
So when you're a kid and you throw a toy across the room, your parent says, don't be angry or you get punished for it.
Yeah.
Or in school, you know, the world tells you, you know, kind of looks at you like in shame almost, like shaming you for the anger. But what about this? What about groups that are angry, you know, that where they're out there in the world and they're just like, you know, with the pitchforks and, you know, railing against something. And so how is that, like, so there's also power in the group through anger? Is that kind of from evolutionary terms, like going to war? There's some kind of camaraderie or comfort in, we all share this. So when you just the opposite of what you're saying is that the group looks down on anger. There's also groups that feed on anger.
Oh, absolutely. But we would consider those baser emotions, and then you combine that with the ignorance of, you know, human nature and how things should be done, like the rule of law.
Like not critical thinking and more like groupthink. And
yes.
So anger can actually become addictive to groups and everyone. Because I know, like, even when I was in the corporate world, if there was someone had a problem with the boss, we'd all get together and be like angry together, and it kind of gave us this sort of fuel. But we never really dealt with the person. We were kind of using gossip or like venting amongst each other. And so that's not really a good way. And we're going to get into the ways to process it. But there is that element too where anger is accepted, like to kind of talk about it and talk about how mad you are, right?
Well, if you think about football teams or any sports teams, right? It's us against them.
I hate the Red Sox.
Yeah. And there's this,
I'm a Yankee fan, sorry.
This rivalry, and it gets visceral.
Yeah.
People actually act out. Very few, right? Comparatively to all the people that are involved.
So that small segment,
Yeah, but there is that kind of idea of let's rev it up, right? Let's get this anger going towards the other team so that our team has that support.
So it's kind of like a power. It has a lot of power in there. So that's what I'm saying is that so when you're in a group that doesn't let you express it, you're feeling powerless and feeling self-judged and so repress it. And then when you're in a group that lets you express it, it may get out of control in another way too. So either way. So how do we get conditioned around anger? Like how does this, you know, like you said, we're told not to express it.
Yeah, so at the individual level, some of the most common causes and triggers of repressed anger, right? So these are things that kind of predispose you to repressing the anger, to judging it as bad and something to be avoided. So having perfectionistic tendencies. Do you know anybody like that?
I have I don't know. Like I just let myself make mistakes all the time. Yeah, that kind of tightness, that rigidness, is that the perfectionism? Is like the kind of like almost like a totalitarian, authoritarian kind of way you regulate yourself is you have to kind of never give yourself a break.
Right, because losing control would be seen as a no-no for that person, right?
So anger is kind of like that out of control?
Exactly, and so it would be something that is repressed, right? Using mood-altering substances like drugs or alcohol. Now, this is a controversial one. We've spoken about this before, but we're talking about people who use drugs and alcohol as self-medication, right? So instead of dealing with their anger, they take a drink, they smoke some pot, they take some drug, and avoid dealing with it.
Or when I've seen people that drink. We see this a lot of people that abuse alcohol. They are this quiet, normal person, and then when they drink, the anger comes out.
That's true.
So
having a tendency to intellectualize. I don't know who that would be.
That's Robert.
To intellectualize your emotions. And then here's this other one.
Oh, no.
Wanting to please others.
I have no idea. So, Rob, are you saying that I have a lot of anger?
I'm not saying anything.
He's psychoanalyzing me on the podcast today. No, it's true. I mean, this has been like a deep conditioning around my growing up is my mother is such a sweet woman, and she's always trying to please. And I adopted that behavior. Like everyone in my family is that pleasing, good, kind of do-gooders. And then when you told me it was my anger, I was like, I am not angry. I'm so kind and giving. But then if we overgive and people don't appreciate it, or people take advantage of that, then that anger, and then you can't express it, so you feel this need. One of the things that I discovered recently is that pleasing is sort of a way to suppress other people's anger.
Yeah,
so
it's a manipulation.
Yeah, it's a manipulation. It's a control trick toolkit that you use to like keep everyone from getting mad at you. And so it's not only you're afraid of your own anger, but you're afraid of others' anger as well.
Absolutely. So what happens when we repress anger? And Freud, of course, was a genius at this. He came up with this whole idea of repression, and then looking at, well, what happens. He says, think of a house with a chimney, and the chimney has been blocked, and the fire's on.
Oh, that's a good metaphor.
And the smoke starts to fill the room, right? And of course, you can contain it for a while, but sooner or later, the smoke's going to start to come out the bottom of the doors, through any gaps in the windows, etc. So that's an apt metaphor.
I think the one that you have on your list here is overuse of sarcasm and cynicism. Anyone who's on the East Coast, we all have that kind of sarcasm. We use that a lot.
Yeah,
and then also like kind of cynicism, like a critical, like, look at blah, 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 and you're kind of picking, but it's not overly aggressive, but it's just like a little, like kind of picking. And cynicism about life, the kind of a little frustration with life, and so it comes across as that cynicism.
Absolutely.
And that's I think we learn the way to how we deal with anger through our parents. So when we see how our parents dealt with it, some people use humor to push away anger, like you said, the sarcasm, or avoiding the anger in some way. So we look at the way our parents dealt with it, our family systems, and our culture, and then we decide, okay, this is how we deal with it, because as babies, we don't know what this anger is, and we just get conditioned to each individually a different way to deal with it. That's why there's so many variety of people that deal with anger in different ways, and we feel like, why can't everyone be like me and pleasing and just go with the flow, and then there's that one person that's angry all the time, and you're like, okay, they're actually showing me an aspect of myself.
Yeah. So overuse of sarcasm and cynicism. Here the key word is overuse, right?
Yeah.
When it becomes the go-to, and the person kind of is always in that cynical mode of criticizing others and things. And
also cynical, like everything's terrible, everything's bad, and complaining a lot.
Yeah, it sours the personality. So these are signs that you've been repressing anger, and it's starting to seep out the bottom of the door, kind of thing. Becoming defensive when accused of being angry. Right.
I wasn't defensive. I was just shocked when you told me that. I think if it was someone else, maybe I would be defensive, but I was like, I don't feel angry. I was defense, but I wasn't angry at, overly angry or defensive. I guess I was.
Feeling a need to control many things in your life. Like you feel like things are out of control and you're very uncomfortable. You want to get things back under control so you can relax.
Yeah, right? This kind of feeling like you're never caught up.
Yeah. Being passive-aggressive when you interact with others.
Could you describe passive-aggressiveness? Because I think I didn't understand it initially, and then when I learned about it, but just for people who don't know what that is, because that term is thrown around a lot.
Yeah, so it's when you appear to agree on the surface, but then you do things to sabotage that agreement, kind of underhanded, and say, well, that it was my fault, right? So you agree to take the trash out, but then you spill the trash on the driveway and you say, oops,
Is that what you did last night?
I think so. I think. But that's just an example, right?
It's like in a resentment, almost unconscious resentment of the task.
Well, it's not unconscious, well, yeah, it is unconscious in the sense that the person often is not really aware why they're doing it. They think, well, I'm getting back at them somehow, on the surface, but it's really that repressed anger that's there.
What about someone who is angry, but then they kind of don't tell you directly, and they're kind of being maybe like kind of like trying to like almost manipulate the words, and maybe a little sarcasm or like something like that? Like, is that passive aggressive where you're being nice but you're insulting them at the same time? Is that
that could be passive aggressive, right? Like, what is it? The woman that says, "That's a beautiful dress. I didn't know they made it in your size."
Yeah,
that kind of kind of
that's
double,
not very nice.
Double kind of communication.
Or like, I got a lot out of this program, but it was so expensive. Or this, I love this shirt, but it was so expensive, or that something like that, where you're resenting that you spent so much money on something.
Sure. Having difficulty setting boundaries, standing up for yourself and saying no. It might indicate, right, that you're repressing anger. You're afraid to express anger, or that you will get angry in the process and blow up.
I have a term I use for anger. It's unexpressed passion, where it's this, like, anger's this burn, like the fire burning, this desire in us to grow and survive and take care of ourselves. We have a natural self-protective mechanism, and that when we don't speak up, it becomes anger, and we don't say, that's wrong, or keep your boundaries. And I think I don't know if it's more for women or men, but I think women are more conditioned to be more passive and more like go with the flow than men are, or taught to fight the battle, and women are more like keep the peace. I don't know what you think about that women have a lot more anger to deal with than men, or both.
Well, I think it might be a little bit different, but either way, we don't want to buy into anger, right, and let it dominate our lives, because that's what will happen if we get used to the idea that I'm going to use anger or aggression to deal with my situations all the time.
Yeah, so you be passive aggressive, and that's your go-to. You can be pleasing to deal with your anger, or you can actually be angry all the time to deal with your anger. But it's not really, all those qualities aren't really giving you freedom, because they're acting out of aggression. A lot of times I see that a person how their parent dealt with anger, like if their parent was angry at them and yelling at them, then that person would tend to want to do unconsciously, even though they didn't like it, and find a scapegoat to kind of pass it along, just like any kind of pattern, to get that power.
Absolutely. Becoming explosive when you find yourself angry.
Yeah.
So in other words, when the cat is let out of the bag, it really, kind of takes over, and the person it appears to be fighting for their lives, when it might just be something small, insignificant, a boundary issue or something like that.
And the key there is that when we do explode, or we plead, or any of these things that we do with anger, we aren't making, like, it's like the emotion is taking over versus making the decision. Even if we're not expressing the anger and we're pleasing, it's like that conditioning is making the decision for us.
Yeah. Just quickly, a few other things. Complaining a lot, frequent negative critical thoughts, feeling bitter, ignoring things that bother you, holding grudges, feeling guilty and ashamed. Often people don't make this connection. People that talk about shame, a lot of it could be tied to repressed anger. Because
they don't feel like worthy enough to express what they need.
Yeah.
And then they feel guilty.
Yes. And then the physical consequences can include high blood pressure, chronic stress, heart problems. We know anger can actually damage the heart tissue. There's actual research on this, so very powerful emotions that you wanna deal with them in a conscious way, and there are good ways to deal with them. Insomnia, impulse control problems,
Self-destructive behaviors.
yeah, self-destructive behaviors. Of course, we're all guilty of that to some extent. It could be just eating bad food, drinking, of course, or driving recklessly.
Or even just not taking care of your body, not working out, avoiding yourself. Even overworking could be a sign of anger. It's like, I got to work. Like, it's almost like you do keep yourself busy so you can't be in your body. So you're trying to get out of your body through intellectual stimulation and escape. Yeah. So anger, like we said, it's a necessary emotion, but if we don't know how to work with it, it can be very destructive. So how do we approach it? How do we look at anger and make it our friend?
Yeah, and that I like that word approach, because the approach is that we first have to kind of get the mindset of what is it that we're working with. If we approach it with it's something bad in me, then we're already kind of crippling ourselves in our approach, because now all we can do is try to fix this, try to get rid of this, try to kind of patch it up somehow.
Well, in kind of the 80s, they had those encounter groups where people were like pounding pillows and, primal screaming and all that stuff. And they thought they were releasing the anger. But in effect, what they were doing is actually rewiring and hardwiring the brain to feel the anger even more instead of actually making it successul. So they stopped doing those things, as you know, unless you're in some old group that hadn't got the memo on that we think that if we just like yell a lot and express it and tell people off that's going to get rid of it, but it actually is making us more a prison to it and using it as a tool of destruction than actually a tool of wisdom.
It can, but there you see the misunderstanding that often arises when people take techniques from psychoanalysis or other psychologies and use them in isolation.
Yeah.
Because catharsis is part of psychoanalysis, and it was considered a good way to deal with some of these emotions. But when you take it in isolation and you're not doing the deeper work of psychoanalysis, then you're just doing what you're describing.
We're working on the ego level, and psychoanalysis works on the unconscious.
That's right. So pounding pillows and expressing anger would simply reinforce that behavior because it feels good. And it's self-reinforcing in a sense.
And there's something about, in the process, if you're doing individuation work, we're going to talk about that feeling of being able to be present with it is good, but you want to, like you said, approach it in the right way.
Right. So the approach then is that there's nothing wrong here. It's simply we're working with our mind, and part of our mind is having this thing we call emotions, and one of the primary emotions is anger. That it's been there, it's served us, and it's a tool that we can use, but we don't necessarily have to repress it and to label it as bad. So once we get that right frame of mind, then we can proceed. Now, here's a little, let's say, a little kind of model that you can use in working with emotions, because most of us are taught to think in terms of this, that the emotion we're having somehow is identified with us, and that we are identifying with it. The I, which is a temporary false sense of self, is the one that is caught up in the anger. In essence, it is the one that is defending itself with the anger. Yeah, the ego, that I. But it's a false sense of self.
Yeah.
When we're caught up in that self, then, and that false sense of self in the ego, then it appears that I should be angry, right? Because somebody hurt me, somebody did wrong to me. But the way we want to approach it here is to step back a little bit and to ask, who is the one that is observing that experience of anger? And that observer is the witness, the pure awareness in us. And when we approach it that way, now we can work with any emotion, including anger, without getting caught up in it.
You know what really helped me when you described, and this is in Eastern spirituality, they talk about this, is that you see the ego as an object in the world interacting with other objects. So instead of you're the object, it's like you're watching this character that's you, this object have anger. And so it helps like have a different perspective on that relationship we have to ourselves. This is an object, this is a persona. It's not as real as I think it is. It's a construct that's functioning in the world, but it's not really who I am. And then you stop being so defensive around it, because it's like this, it's not you that you're defending, it's just almost a hologram that you're defending, or the great powerful eyes, the projection of this little part of ourselves into the world. And so I like that idea of seeing it as the ego as an object that we're watching through pure awareness. So it's the object, this identity, this object is having this experience. Then you can see it from a different perspective. Versus I am angry. It's like, oh, this persona, this ego's experiencing anger right now. Let's explore that.
So the theory is pretty simple. The practice, of course, is very difficult because we're so conditioned to take things personally. Right? What is anger? It's that we took it personally and we said, how dare they? I got to get back at them.
It's that retribution we're looking for.
That's right. And there's nothing wrong with that. But when we don't recognize what it is, we think that's an actual kind of true account of what's going on. We're caught up in the emotion. But the real understanding, the true understanding is that it's our mind's interpretation of an event. That's why something that makes me angry will not make you angry, because it's not an absolute. It's more of my mind's interpretation of a situation and what I made out of it. And that's what we're dealing with, a subjective interpretation of our conditioned mind.
So someone could, for example, get angry because their mother is saying, how are you, like kind of criticizing them a little bit of, why aren't you doing this or why aren't you doing that? And they're like kind of the daughter or the son is like angry, like, Mom, get off my case. But a lot of times I ask them, well, maybe she's doing that because she loves you and she wants you to, get the things you want. It's just the way she communicates that is just maybe not how you want to see it. And you're perceiving it as your own judgment of letting yourself down. Like she's really triggering in you your own frustration with your own self-criticism. And so when we start to see that, they're like, oh, okay, well, maybe I should be gentler to myself. And then what happens is the parent usually, they have a different relationship with them. And all of a sudden they're like, oh, she really cares. Mom really cares about me. She's involved. Can you imagine? I always tell them, imagine if your mother didn't care. If you were going to be successful or not, didn't care if you got married, didn't care. It's kind of comes from that place. And the only thing that anyone can make up about you or put on you is something you already believe yourself. They can't pour ideas into your head. It's already in there, and they're just kind of reflecting back like a mirror. And so when we understand that, then we stop being angry out there and know that the real work isn't to get back at those people or to, of course you have to keep boundaries with, people in the world, but you also have to go within and say, what is this arising in me? What is really going on here?
Yeah. So notice this. We're not neglecting the emotion. We're not pushing it away. We're not labeling it as good and bad. We're simply saying, I want to observe this. I want to see it. I want to become conscious of it.
Be curious about it.
Yes. And then we're approaching it with a friendly, open attitude, almost as if saying, this is an opportunity for me to work with deeper issues of anger here. Instead of thinking, oh my God, what a terrible chore I have of working with these terrible emotions. we're already on the wrong track there. We have to approach it. This is an opportunity, and this is going to enlighten me and give me more freedom in the process.
Well, if you think about anger as power, and we're feeling it, there's this like a dog that's put in the corner. It growls because it feels stuck. So it's like that unexpressed passion again. It doesn't have that freedom. So if you approach anger as I'm reclaiming my power, that's a way different approach than I got to get rid of this anger because it's negative.
You're right.
It's like, oh, wait, there's power in here. I would say there's a lot of energy arising in me right now. It's a lot of energy. What can I do with it that's creative?
Yeah.
And so you're reclaiming it and allowing yourself to use, because we're all energy. So it's like using that force of emotion to create, to inspire, to maybe break through our laziness and get things done, or do the things that we've always promised ourselves we do. A lot of the anger is really toward ourselves. Why aren't we doing the things in life that we wanted to do, or having the things we want? That anger is there. And then we want to, instead of making the world be the problem, we can start going in and saying the solution is inside. Yeah. So anger can be a really powerful way to reclaim your power.
Very much so. It is like we said in the previous podcast, what drives the psyche, the fuel is emotion. Emotion is what motivates us, what inspires us, what prompts us to do our work.
I know sometimes I remember when I was kind of low and wondering if I was going to make it with my own, starting out. And I remember thinking, I started getting like this kind of anger, like no, like almost like not an anger, but it was like a passion arose. And it was like this force that said, I don't care, I'm going to do this. And that's kind of tied to anger. Don't you think that force to grow, that force to have passion? And if we let go of that, we think that's bad. We're going to have a flat, uneventful life, a meaningless life, and that passion we need to reclaim it and put it to work on good instead of evil. put it for good versus evil. Very powerful. I mean, look at the movies, Star Wars, Luke and the little guy with the ears, Yoda. He says you have to learn to manage you work with your anger. And his father, Darth Vader, sorry if you didn't see the movie, gave into the anger and went to the dark side. And so it's this kind of like, how do we balance it in the wisdom and use and channel that to for good? Yeah.
And then as you practice, you're going to fail, but be okay with that.
And not judge yourself, right? When you're angry or you have an outburst.
That's right. Because these are difficult things to work with, but even gaining a little bit of ground in it will give you great benefits because you're reclaiming the power in your mind, and you're using it to direct now your life in a creative way, instead of letting those conditioned emotions drive you and compel you to act in certain ways.
So if you think about the waves of an ocean, and you try to swim out to the ocean, and the waves are kind of constantly crashing down on you and pulling you under, what we're doing here is we're not getting rid of the waves. Think of those waves as different types of emotions. We're actually riding it and surfing it, using the force not to knock us down, but to take us to where we want to go. So next week, we're going to continue our lovely series on emotions, and we're going to talk about my favorite topic, which is love. So love and hate, and the two sides of the coin, and how they could love can make you glorious or break your heart. And,
make you or break you.
Make you or break you. So it should be a great episode. So we'll see you next week. Have a wonderful day. And also, I want to mention, please subscribe to our channel. There's a button here below that you can subscribe. And on our channel, I also have a special gift for you, a meditation called Honoring Your Anger. And there's a link below in the description, so you can click on it. And it's a great exercise to talk about that kind of relates to what we talked about today.
Thanks for watching. See you next time.
Take care.